Okay, good afternoon. This is Jay Waters. I'm with the Americans in Wartime Museum and the Oral History Project. Today is 5 March 2019, and I'm here in the Alexandria area over by the high school, Hayfield High School, just up the road. And I've got the honor of interviewing Mr. Harold Gale, also known as Hal Gale. But sir, good afternoon, and thanks for letting me do this.
It's a pleasure, sir.
If you would, for the record, just give us your full name and where you were born.
Yeah, my name is Harold Walter Gale. I was born in Syracuse, New York.
Okay. And I know we talked a little bit earlier as we were getting set up, but what wars did you participate in?
I supported from continental U.S. among others, the Cuban Missile Crisis activity, the Vietnam War, counterterrorism activities, preparation, threat projection for system acquisition, which has now become a federally required portion of the defense acquisition system.
Okay. And I think as we were talking earlier too, you were definitely involved in a lot of the Cold War.
Absolutely.
Okay. And we'll go into those in a lot more detail as we keep going forward here. Could you tell us though, did you have any other any family members, parents or grandparents, relatives that served in the military?
My older brother was a sergeant in the U.S. Army, served in Europe, Germany. My nephew, David Gale, served in the U.S. Navy and in due time became a two-star Navy admiral.
Oh, wow.
Currently retired, doing well. Wonderful children.
And speaking of children, I think you said at least one of your children is in the military or was in the military.
No. I have two daughters. An older daughter is civil service, works for the U.S. Navy.
Okay.
Near Seattle.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, no, that's great. I mean, it seems like you've got.
The second daughter married a Navy submariner who was on board a boomer.
Okay.
So we do. My family does have links to the modern military forces.
Absolutely. Okay. And if you would, for a minute, just tell us what you remember and where you were on September 11th, 2001. What was that day like for you?
I was at my current residence, and as good fortune had it, the television set was on. I saw the flame and fire from the first aircraft collision, World Trade Center, and watched real time on television the second airplane crash into the tower, and the flame, smoke, fire.
Mm-hmm.
Oddly enough, in my military history, among my career, among things we designed against was use of civilian aircraft as weapons, and the hypothetical targets of nuclear electric power plants particularly got our attention.
Sure.
We did not understand the unique nature of the World Trade Towers, which caused them to collapse in the manner they did.
Right.
That was extremely unusual.
And so you were right here in Alexandria,
downstairs.
Virginia. Okay. And then so you also mentioned a couple minutes ago about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Why don't you tell us what you were doing for that?
I was second lieutenant at Edwards Air Force Base in the Mojave Desert, California, on duty at the Rocket Propulsion Lab, and the news came over the radio regarding the crisis escalation. The orders came through for military commands of what to do in the event of an attack on the United States. Much to the amusement of the young officers at the Rocket Propulsion Lab, we were ordered to go hide in the nearby boron mines. So that established our priority in the national defense system. Nothing immediate importance that we were doing. Later on, such as the strategic short-range attack missile propulsion system was invented, as it were, at the Rocket Propulsion Lab.
Well, and just for the record, in case someone doesn't remember exactly when the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred, when was the time of year and the month?
As I remember it, it was essentially May or June of that year.
Of what year was that then?
If I remember
was it
correctly, it would be 1961
Okay, yeah, I was going to.
under President JFK.
But I think a lot of folks had said that was, at least the feeling in the nation was that was pretty close to coming to a nuclear war.
It was indeed.
Yeah.
After the fall of the USSR, the historical data, Khrushchev himself claimed that he had merely intended a bluff. Unfortunately, nuclear weapons, it was not known at the time, were on the ground. Tactical nuclear weapons were on the ground in Cuba at the time that the blockade was held. It was close. It was dicey.
Yeah.
Indeed, scary stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks don't think back or don't remember that kind of stuff.
In my recollection, the nearest danger point was under the Carter administration when the Soviet Union went into Afghanistan, and at that time I understood that they had stationed a nuclear submarine-launched ballistic missile submarine off the coast of the United States, roughly some 200 miles. And in my opinion, President Carter did the right thing, namely, he let them go.
Yeah.
They did no better in Afghanistan than we did in Vietnam. And my intelligence-related activities at Headquarters Air Force System Command did indeed support the U.S. activities in Afghanistan against the USSR.
Okay.
It was complex activities. I do not understand. I do not believe I have clearance to give specifics.
Okay. Well, let's just go back a little bit to some of this early stuff for you. Why did you enter I believe it was the Air Force initially?
Indeed.
So why did you go into the Air Force? Tell us about that.
I grew up on a dairy farm as a son of a hired man. Through the age of 17, I was responsible for cleaning behind 80 cows a day, milking 80 cows twice a day. And I had an overwhelming desire to find a way to go somewhere else and do other things. In addition, through science fiction, science in high school, I was fascinated by science technology, in particular airplanes. I was awarded a New York State Regents Scholarship for Syracuse University.
Okay.
And all other expenses I had to earn myself. I had no financial assistance from my parents or relatives or anybody else. The Syracuse offered a choice between attending ROTC classes, which seemed to be safe, painless, and you got credits for graduation, or gym classes, which practically didn't get you any credits for graduation. And the engineering required something like 22 to 24 credits per semester to graduate in 4 years. So the pressure was extremely intense, and ROTC was a way to get there. In the junior senior year, the Air Force provided us, if I remember correctly, something like $80 allowance for clothing, uniforms, and so forth, which I confess I mostly applied to food. That, thanks to, I believe, the assistance of a ROTC captain, it's my impression he helped arrange that my first duty assignment was, in fact, at the Air Force Rocket Propulsion Lab with, honest-to-God, real hands-on engineering work. Hypothetically, I could have been assigned as a maintenance officer on B-52s or camera maintenance on the sled track at Edwards Air Force Base, many other options.
Okay, but so as you went through Syracuse and you did the ROTC, like a lot of ROTC, I would imagine when you graduated, you were commissioned upon graduation as a second lieutenant?
Absolutely, that's correct.
And then where did you go for your initial training after that?
Strictly speaking, the ROTC training was a summer camp between junior and senior year.
Yep.
I attended Lockbourne Air Force Base. And if I remember correctly, it was 30 days. And the introduction to the systems and culture of the Air Force was very sterling. Remarkably effective insight to what life would be in the real Air Force.
Sure, absolutely.
I will admit that through my entire Air Force career, everywhere I was assigned, the people who were already there kept telling me, this isn't the real Air Force.
Ah.
But the Air Force is an incredible variety of places, responsibilities that have defended the nation since World War I, introduction of military airplanes.
Absolutely.
It's a privilege to have been a member of the force that did that.
Well, so then in addition to your training when you were still a student, but now you've raised your right hand and you're a second lieutenant, what kind of specialty did they give you, and where did they send you for your very first place?
Much to my delight, they assigned me to report for duty at Edwards Air Force Base, Air Force Flight Test Center, Air Force Rocket Propulsion Laboratory. Much to my astonishment, I was authorized to go interview nearly a dozen job openings.
Wow.
I got to choose my own job. And that's contrary to concepts of the machine-like personnel system. I was, job title was mechanical engineer, which was entirely relevant. My coursework at Syracuse University in no way covered rocket propulsion. However, it did include chemistry, structure of materials, pipes, electric power plant, steam pipes. And I picked a less popular branch of the Rocket Propulsion Lab. The Atlas and Thor missile were being in tests. They had enormous flame and roaring on the test stands and in the news, extremely popular. And a simple, uncomplicated Minuteman was beginning to be deployed. And my buddies all wanted the popular with the girls' jobs in the liquid propellant rocket division. And I figured if they aren't looking for interesting work, those guys can go over there and watch the flame and smoke. I'm going to go find something where I can really do engineering.
Sure.
Much to my astonishment, before I had clearances, and there was no, strictly speaking, military training at all. There were no handbooks provided to a green second lieutenant months out of college. I was handed a requirement to design a air-to-surface missile. Preliminary design, weight, payload, range, and I did. I didn't have clearances. And I gave the data to a captain who gave it to a major, and the division chief put together the report for the Pentagon, and they wouldn't let me read it. It was a couple months later before I had clearances, and I could then begin to see what the commanders, the senior officer, did with the stuff. It was shortly into that, perhaps 6 months after I arrived, I was offered the responsibility. I wasn't ordered to take it. It was an opportunity to accomplish the design from a blank sheet of paper, without a handbook, with no official procedures available, and no instruction by senior military or civil service people. Second lieutenant, build, test, deploy initial operating capability of the National Ballistic Test Evaluation System, whose priority on the congressional list of priorities was immediately behind the Minuteman ICBM. I applied my coursework straight away and discovered through colleagues and advice how to write acquisition or purchase orders existed. Machine shops existed, so that if I could get blueprints cut, I could have the hardware made, constructed, welded. And the liquid propellant rocket division had a very effective instrumentation system, facilities, electronic equipment in existence. So it was a straightforward manner to write task orders to request their participation and assistance. But the actual hands-on design from a blank sheet of paper was in the hands of a second lieutenant at age 22.
Yeah, and, so, and still at Edwards Air Force Base, which I believe is in California?
Absolutely,
and
Mojave Desert.
Okay, oh, in the desert, okay. And so this would have been about 1960?
1960 into 61.
Okay.
I was allocated approximately $100,000 in modern money and 8 months to get the thing from blank piece of paper to initial operating capability and a report published. And once a month, I and other research project leaders reported our progress to the Rocket Propulsion Laboratory Commander, Colonel Harold Norton. The Friday reports were known as Black Fridays for obvious reasons. The highlight of my progress reports, as I recall it, was in the middle of the project. I was the last because I didn't have any smoke and flame to report. The other guys had really spectacular stuff to show.
Okay.
And I just had purchase order progress. And I got up in front of the whole command and staff, senior officers, and said, "Sir, I'm proud to report that my people and I were on schedule this month. We didn't plan to do anything, and we didn't." The room was silent. Then Colonel Norton laughed, and then everybody laughed, which was very nice.
High risk, high reward, right?
Yes. In the absence of design in later years, the Bates project has remained in existence, and Air Force public relations reports through at least 2014, 2016 indicate it's still in use. But it achieved its mission required by Congress at the end of that 8 months when I issued my Defense Technical Information Center report and turned it over to another lieutenant for routine use.
Well, I think looking at the notes before, and we talked very briefly, you were selected at some point in your career for a PhD program. Could you tell us how you got selected and then where you went for that?
How I got there from here, as it were, from the Rocket Propulsion Lab. I, after 4 years, spent 2 years at Rocketdyne, where the Saturn V Man on the Moon program was taking place, the propulsion. After 2 years there, I went to the Air Force Institute of Technology, got a master's degree, and to my astonishment, I was ordered to report for duty at the Foreign Technology Division on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base doing nobody told me what. And what I knew of the Foreign Technology Division is what I had read in the newspapers. I found myself assigned to a group of 10 people, which the Congress Secretary of Defense had ordered that the intelligence community begin preparing technology forecasts, among other things, for rocket propulsion and turbojet engine propulsion of the Warsaw Pact, that's the Soviet Union and the Western European countries, and Communist China.
Okay, so you were, as you were saying, you were working on some Warsaw Pact stuff with the Foreign Technology Division out at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
At the responsibility had been placed on the intelligence community because of the Sputnik surprise, Soviet deployment of advanced fighter aircraft, which brought an end to electronic reconnaissance over the Soviet Union, The Department of Defense was tired of being surprised. The group that was established in the Foreign Technology Division was the unwanted, and I don't mean that unkindly, was people from the other divisions who were not otherwise occupied, shall we say. Mm-hmm. The other divisions were analyzing the strategic bombers, the advanced fighters that could be seen by national technical means and had been met and countered in combat in the Middle East and in Vietnam by that time. So that's where the sharp edge of the intel community was on the high technology, high expense intelligence collection methods. To make 10 and 5, 10 and 15-year forecasts is an incredible challenge because it's in the minds of the leaders and engineers and scientists of the foreign nations that information exists. Fortunately, they had made an assessment, which is described somewhat ambiguously in the Penkovsky papers, that they would release information slowly at international conferences, and their contempt for the ability of the U.S. intelligence community to use publications, open literature, was well-founded. Practically none of us could read Russian, and it was incredibly difficult to get permission to learn Russian. The machine computer-based translations were, shall we say, challenging. Mm-hmm. For example, needle bearings spinning in high temperature lubricant became thorns spinning in hot butter. I kid you not. Major controversies were at stake, including hypothetical advanced additives to Soviet ICBM propellants, which permitted them to deliver much larger payloads than the United States could deliver with what we thought were the right propellants, namely kerosene and oxygen, mm-hmm. and the Atlas, Thor, and so on. When the Soviets displayed their SS-6 ICBM at the Paris Air Show, the Soviet name of their propellants were liquid oxygen and kerosene. And indeed, that's what it was. The technology of the Soviet Union liquid rocket combustion chambers permitted operation at 20% higher chamber pressure, thus explaining the higher performance. The modern liquid rocket engines being purchased by the United States from the USSR are truly incredible advances of technology. The technology used, the cycle used in the space shuttle, liquid rocket engines are in fact derivative by the U.S. from Soviet research reported by the Soviets in open literature. And they were aware. Right. The review were published in Pravda that Americans were reading Soviet Union literature. They just had a low opinion of our ability to understand and use it. And for us to make the forecasts, it was simply a matter of tracking their technology back, captured equipment since World War II, up to the current, comparing it to their research reports, and forecasting that what they said they would try to do in the future would be accomplished at about the same rate of success as previously, namely in the ballpark of 75% to 80%, achieving the goal they said they were going to try to do. Mm-hmm. This sounds remarkably straightforward and uncomplicated, but the Soviets, of course, censored all their open literature. They were their engineers, scientists were forbidden to use in the books certain words. And like my friends and myself when I was a second lieutenant and a captain and a major, I talked around the subject on the telephone, and when I wrote reports, I talked around the subject. And the foreign engineers, bless them, did the same thing. So
I'm sorry. So did this lead your selection to the PhD
indeed,
program? Okay.
when key reports were briefed to NASA headquarters, in particular, it led to compliments which were published in the base newspaper.
Yeah.
And when Colonel Weinbrunner, the commander of the Forward Technology Division, asked me what he could do for me.
And a little bit more and a little higher. Yeah, there you go. And a little bit over that way. Okay. Yeah. So tell us what you're showing us there.
This is a autographed photograph from Neil Armstrong, dedicated to my daughters, which was the meeting in particular was Dr. von Braun, Dr. Eggers, and Neil Armstrong.
Okay.
In appreciation of the briefing and its importance to the NASA programs, those gentlemen asked what they could do for me in addition to sending a nice letter to my boss. And I said, gee, I would sure appreciate a autographed photograph from the gentleman who was first to step on the surface of the moon. Mm-hmm. And I understood that as a modest gentleman, extremely rare. And he did agree to do it. And in due time, it arrived.
And that's the photo there.
And that's the photo.
With Neil Armstrong?
Yes.
And was he present at the time when you were?
He was present in the meeting.
Yeah, cool.
Three NASA people.
Yeah.
Von Braun, Dr. Eggers, and Neil Armstrong. The only NASA people present, and me. I was the DIA Air Force representative of the information. That plus other intelligence accomplishments led my commander, Colonel Weinbrunner, to say to me, he gave me a commendation medal ribbon. He said, look, hell, a 35-cent ribbon isn't enough for guys like you and your team. They got this done. If you ever need help, come and let me know. 4 years at the Forward Technology Division, I received notice I was going to be sent to an isolated location with my family, and my daughter had recently born, 2 years old, medical difficulties. This was going to be a very severe family problem. I went down the hall to the commander's door, knocked on his door. He invited me in, and I reminded him of his promise. I said, today's the day. And I had in my possession information about the Commander's Option PhD program. I showed it to him and said, sir, this looks like an answer for me. It may save the life of my children. And the chief scientist, Colonel Weinbrunner, made telephone calls, wrote letters to the Pentagon, and I was informed that out of about 312 candidates, 12 were selected, of which I was one, mm-hmm. and I could pick any university in the United States, and I would have something in the order of 36 to 40 months available for a PhD program. Mm. I chose Purdue University in part because the research done at Purdue University was highly regarded by the Soviet Union Academy of Sciences. Much to my amazement, in due time my PhD advisor, Dr. Joe Hoffman, was in fact one of the people highly regarded by the Soviet Academy of Science, totally unknown to him. He had done research for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on advanced jet aircraft engines and nozzles in particular for the F-117 aircraft stealth. And this all came as a big surprise to Joe. But in any case, that's the origin of how I got the PhD scholarship award through 36 months of desperate hard work. I could never work for two bosses at the same time.
Well, but so you're still active duty Air Force, and so what year is this, and what do you think your rank is by now?
At that time, I was a major. That was 1971 through 72. Actually, it was 3 years time span from
sure.
Beginning to graduation.
Okay.
And on graduation, I chose to go to the Air Force Ballistic Missile Division, which was Norton Air Force Base. Ballistic Missile Division is a branch of the Space and Missile Systems Office that was at El Segundo in Los Angeles. Worked for General Hepfer on the Peacekeeper missile development and completion of the Minuteman deployment. The job description there, I simplify by saying it was suppression of fraud, waste, and abuse. Things were going, occasionally was strange things would happen in the manufacturing processes, and we went and reviewed how come things weren't working well anymore.
Okay. Well, you mentioned some of the space shuttle program and some of the propulsion. Were you ever involved with anything with Morton Thiokol Company?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Did you ever visit with them or work with them?
Many times.
Okay. Just tell us a little bit about your interaction with the Morton Thiokol folks.
At Rocket Propulsion Laboratory, one of the groups, which I was contract manager for the research done by Thiokol at Elkton, Maryland, a small tactical and space-based solid propellant rockets. Later on, the Minuteman, when I was the Ballistic Missile Division, the Thiokol branch office in Wasatch, Utah, was responsible for the first stage. I was the deputy chief of the propulsion division and periodically went to the Thiokol offices, and we reviewed the reports and the progress. Among one of the interesting ones in retrospect, the casting process, like the propellant casting, it physically indeed resembled an angel food cake, you know, with a funnel and a hole in the middle. Mm-hmm. And when they trimmed it off to make it smooth and the end, they had machined it 1/10 of an inch too short on a 30-foot long propellant cartridge. Mm-hmm. And they were suggesting that it be discarded and they get paid to make a new one. And I was very well aware that the navigation control system counted on a reserve of propellant in the second and third stages used later. So 1/10 of an inch too short was not going to be any slightest problem at all. And I therefore recommended it be accepted as a functional missile stage.
Okay.
Good fun.
Well, one of the questions, and we talked a little bit about this before, about direct involvement in combat operations, and I think you said not direct, but during the Vietnam War you had quite a few indirect roles.
Yeah.
So maybe tell us, where were you and what did you do during the Vietnam War in the indirect support?
The two phases of the operation, one was at the Foreign Technology Division. The Soviets introduced the shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile, Strela, which just means arrow or rifle. It was quite ineffective, and for reasons known only to themselves, the Soviet Union published a research report describing research to improve a 3-inch diameter, about 3 feet long, solid propellant rocket, which indeed was an improvement of the Strela rocket propulsion systems to get a bigger warhead up to the height of our American airplanes. The gentlemen and ladies at the Defense Intelligence Agency thought this was wildly improbable, that the guys at Wright-Patterson, the young people there who had discovered this information. So they came and investigated us, and we showed them the stuff. And people like me and my colleague James Bartley, who had worked at Rocketdyne and Rocket Propulsion Lab, knew real work, real research when we saw it. We could, comparison to real stuff we had done, we could easily distinguish the publish or perish stuff by college professors from Alma-Ata in Kazakhstan, as the Penkovsky papers, which were disregarded. They were repudiated. The Soviets ran a disinformation program to condemn Penkovsky as a liar but his papers, of which I have a copy in my possession, are incredibly accurate. He explained that, for example, at international conferences, they understood the USSR, that they were sending chicken feed, stuff recently cleared as unclassified, for Soviet engineers and scientists, and they were swapping it with American scientists and engineers at conferences in Europe, thereby short-circuiting the spies by 6 months to 2 years, getting the same information transferred from one side to the other. So it was sort of a mutually understood joint exchange program.
Well, so if I understand then, with your support for Vietnam, you were able to figure out some of the missile systems that
and we
they
could
were upgrading.
We reported the information through DIA channels to the Army and the Navy.
And then what do you think? The Air Force took evasive action, or there was direct action to counter those systems?
They integrated the information with the Wild Weasel program and the other protective systems.
Okay. But definitely probably
properly used.
Probably saving hundreds of lives, pilots' lives.
Yeah,
and
lives were saved, no question at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And then even for me, and definitely for the audience that might be watching the interview, you've mentioned a couple times, I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong, but the Pinkefi papers, what was that, or what is that?
It was a Soviet Union member of their intelligence community, became extremely frustrated with the incompetence, corruption of the Soviet bureaucracies. And he initiated contact with the United States embassy people and began sending information regarding Soviet surface-to-air missiles, their intentions, that he was in a point to review Soviet internal documents, processes, and he provided that information to the Kennedy administration. And after he was captured and killed, the CIA, for reasons known only the CIA, permitted the publication of the papers. It was published approximately 1965, if I remember the publication date on the copy I have.
And you got a copy and you read it, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Now, you mentioned a couple times about Russian. Did you ever learn any Russian or get trained in Russian?
Sure.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Well, tell us about how you got trained in.
After you get past the shock of the weird alphabet, which has got 4 more letters than we got, it turns out that the Soviet Union scientists and engineers were reading so much American Institute of Aeronautics, Astronautics journals and reports, that they had begun to talk around their censorship program by using American terminology. And the Soviet word for rocket is, guess what? Rocket. Pronounced out loud. And it was possible to buy at Victor Compton's in Rockville, Maryland, Soviet children's literature, poetry. And it was a matter of simply going and buying the stuff and learning to read it, getting accustomed to the alphabet, the words, the language.
So you were learning essentially self-taught on some Russian from children's books? Is that?
Absolutely.
Wow. But so any formal training on behalf of the Air Force, or
no,
not so much?
Well, eventually I got permission to take a couple months of evening work. At the time I was amazed and distressed that the people working for me, civil service people, wonderful people, could be locally approved, and their mileage and their textbooks were paid for straight away, 100% coverage of expense. For me, as an Air Force officer, a major, I had to get approved in the Pentagon, and my mileage and my books were not covered. So it was some value as a training program, education
Sure.
in the language, but fundamentally the language of science and technology was learned by reading the Soviet books themselves.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the one time you almost got sent on a isolated duty or a remote tour.
Right.
Did you, and then that led to going to the PhD program. But did you have any later times where you got a remote duty to any unusual locations or?
Not involuntary remote assignments, no.
Okay.
I went to Japan,
Okay.
intelligence activities there, coordination with the Japanese. At the height of the Vietnam War, I was among those who were forbidden to get on airplanes leaving the coast. And I did not complain about that.
The coast of the United States.
States, yes,
Okay.
indeed.
Okay, so it sounds like almost your entire career your family was with you.
That's true.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I saw here that you got promoted a bunch of times. It looks like your last rank, your retired rank, was lieutenant colonel. But as you got promoted, was there a promotion that was especially meaningful, or a very special ceremony, or something that happened at one of those promotions that you'd like to share with us?
The promotion to lieutenant colonel at the Ballistic Missile Division was the first and only time at which I and my family held a promotion party for our military and civil service and contractor friends and colleagues. And that was a particular importance and value because it was not clear to me that the PhD 3 years was going to count as contributions to my effectiveness reports. The curiosity, the Soviet Union sent members of the Academy of Science to investigate, and they met the Air Force Institute of Technology professors to explore the difference between the USSR, who sent their graduates directly to design bureaus and were specifically trained for Mikoyan, Tupolev, or the other bomber and fighter aircraft people, as compared to the United States Air Force, which trained people with PhDs and Masters of Engineering and sent them off to fly F-15s and cargo aircraft in Vietnam. The senior academician did not believe the professors, the civilians at the Air Force Institute. He thought he was being lied to. I was present in uniform, and I raised my hand and offered an oath that on my word as an Air Force officer, he had been told the absolute truth, that to so far as my personal knowledge and theirs was concerned, the Air Force paid no slightest attention to the academic degrees and accomplishments of their officers. And I believe you will find on my retirement papers no description of my academic profile.
Well, the nice part about it is, though, you got to keep it. I mean, once you went and you got paid to go to school, basically. So, so the party was a big deal, though, the promotion to lieutenant colonel and the party with your family.
It was immensely important to me. It was a matter of complex situation existed when I relocated from the Ballistic Missile Division to Headquarters Air Force Systems Command for a 4-year intelligence assignment, which was of immense national importance in the long run, that my immediate superior officer was glad to see me go. And his retirement party, relocation party, graduation party, whatever you want to call it, he arranged at a local cafe for 12 people.
Okay.
Approximately 250 people showed up.
Wow.
And the deputy commander showed up. It was a very fascinating
That's great. That's great.
party. Yeah.
Well, we've talked about a lot of stuff. Are there any other specific incidents that stand out to you that were especially meaningful, or maybe something funny happened, or something exciting?
It had its funny moments, but of national importance the information is available on the web if you do a Google search for the word threat assessment reports. It is now a nationally required part of the Defense Systems weapon system acquisition process. In 1977, President Carter published a classified intelligence directive, of which one sentence, all by itself, it was unclassified. It said, in essence, weapon systems should work in the intended environment. And to find that required the issuing of a presidential directive in 1977 is absolutely astonishing.
Mm-hmm.
What in the world does one think that the fighters and bomber aircraft and ballistic missiles were designed to do, if not precisely that? And the DIA, for various reasons, chose not to accept the responsibility of generating threat assessment reports for weapon system acquisition, critical decision milestones, design milestones in particular. So the Secretary of Defense directed that the threat assessment preparation be done by the individual services. Headquarters, Air Force Command, Air Force Chief of Staff Intelligence, people were busy responding to urgent combat support requirements in response to questions from Congress. So they were overburdened, couldn't possibly do it.
Mm-hmm.
So they delegated it to Air Force Systems Command Headquarters. You guys figure it out. And the commander of Headquarters Air Force Systems Command sent it to his Intel Division Chief, Colonel Luther, wonderful gentleman. He sent it to my boss, who said, yeah, we got some people that have come out of American research labs, weapon system development offices, and worked at Foreign Technology Division. Our guys know how to do that. And I was given the lead responsibility to show the process and to take a comprehend. I was given complete freedom. There was no slightest interference or control by my immediate superior, Colonel Gene Marlowe, or Colonel Earther, or the commander of AFSC. I convened participation by each of the Army Service Intel offices, Strategic Air Command, and invited observer participation status from NSA. And God bless them, they all showed up. And we were given no money, no staff, nothing to support the presidential directive. It all had to come out of the hide of the participants that wanted things that would survive in the war environment. I knew where resources could be found, excellent people who believed in the mission, and proceeded to issue guidance. I had no authority. It was purely a leadership. They trusted this guy who acts like he knows what he's doing. A key question came up during that first conference at Systems Command Headquarters. And it was a Navy gentleman, God bless them all, asked the obvious question: how do we know that Air Force senior people are not going to distort the intelligence data for the benefit of the Air Force budget and priority and so forth? And I was standing at the front of the room, chairman at the time, and I said, gentlemen, it's very uncomplicated. So long as I am at the responsible officer for the project, you can trust it. There will be no interference. If you see me, however, leave abruptly, y'all head for the door. They trusted us. They trusted me. They trusted my colleagues. Later, I was invited in my Lieutenant Colonel blue suit to brief a senior general of the United States Army regarding a controversy of one of their weapon systems development. The general did not find his intelligence people views and presentation thoroughly credible. My Army intel colleagues invited me to brief the general, and the general asked me excellent questions. I was asked to explain what decibels are, and I told the general, essentially it's like miles per gallon. More is better. Oh, okay. I was told by the Army folks verbally that things went straightforward from that point.
That's good.
Similarly, several months later, U.S. Navy folks requested me to brief their admiral regarding proposed changes in shipboard strategic communication systems. It was under proposal that space-based communication would be exclusively offered on Navy ships. The weapon system reports clearly described Soviet space-based anti-satellite weapons very routinely used, commonplace. Under no circumstance in the event of nuclear war ought the United States rely exclusively on space-based communication. And I checked with Navy friends recently, indeed still, the Navy carries on their major ships high-frequency land surface-based strategic range communication systems. They do not rely exclusively on space-based. That was mutual trust and respect by all.
Okay. Well, earlier you were telling me a funny story about I think it was, you called it a ballistic missile award or ribbon, and there was some debate about whether you could get that or not. What was that all about?
The Air Force pocket badges, wings for pilots, a different metal chest thing for navigators, electronic warfare, okay? So the Air Force created ballistic or missile badges, and of which there were 3 versions: basic, uncomplicated, silver, and then with a star. And if you had 8 years or some such experience doing research and test of ballistic research or test or evaluation, it didn't matter which, of ballistic missiles, you could get a wreath with a star missile badge. I was at Foreign Technology Division, and a moment of spare time showed up, extremely rare. And I had read about the new with a wreath around the star. So I got a copy of the reg and read it. The regulation did not specify whose ballistic missiles one had studied and done research concerning. So I wrote up a nomination request for award of the Master Missile Badge. A sergeant rejected it. I sent it back with a copy of the regulation attached with highlights. And I got the missile badge.
Cool. Excellent. That's great.
Straightforward.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Well, we're kind of winding down to just a few questions. Maybe we'll jump to the end of your Air Force career. Tell us about your retirement. Where was that, and when, and retirement ceremony? How did that all work out?
The key retirement ceremony was at headquarters, Air Force Systems Command, and I was invited to in December to show up, and kind words were said by the Air Force Systems Command commander.
I'm sorry, this is December 1980?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
It was very uncomplicated. There were no additional party or anything.
Did your family attend?
No,
no,
they did not.
Okay. Just short and sweet.
Short and sweet.
Last day, late in December, it looks like, probably too, right? December 31st looks like your last day.
There is a collateral later date. General, 4-star, Anthony Randy Randolph, known to his friends as Randy, known to others as Andy, at his retirement ceremony, invited me to attend, and I attended wearing a pinstripe business suit, working, TRW engineer, right? And I was pushed out of the way by colonels and the crowd in the same room in which I had been when I retired. And to my astonishment, General Randolph, when it was his turn to speak, asked if Hal Gale would stand up, and he verbally said that I had been in large part responsible for his promotion to brigadier general and thus his career as a general. And after the ceremony, I was amused that the colonels and others at Headquarters System Command were very interested in meeting me, shaking hands.
Sure. Well, that's a good story to be recognized.
Humanity
like
is alive and well. People are grand.
Be recognized like that. That's great.
And
that's
General
great.
Randolph was a superb person.
Well, how do you think your over 20 years in the Air Force then affected you after the rest of your life after the Air Force?
I built on it in my civilian employment as an engineer for TRW. Worked on counterterrorism, hardening, counterterrorism protection at the White House, among other interesting projects. Responsible for a project to improve the emergency action message control system.
Okay.
Control of communications for American nuclear forces under surprise attack under the auspices, the Office of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
And did you do all that in the D.C. area? Or?
Yeah,
and
but that involved travel to the Strategic Air Command, to Minuteman silos. I was authorized to obtain testimony from capsule commanders while promising them anonymity, that they could say to me whatever they believed was the truth.
Sure.
And I would not record their name nor ever, under any circumstance, reveal their names. And that was immensely important. It, in my opinion, answered the crucial question, could a Minuteman missile be launched by a rogue capsule commander? And the absence was absolutely not. It could not possibly happen, both for technical reasons, but basically because the integrity of the officers assigned to the job.
Well, that's great. I mean, it sounds like you had a fascinating career, and then you continued right along with on the civilian side. Are you still working now, or
no,
enjoying some time off? And that's how I met you, through the Military History Club over at the center. Well, is there, looking back on everything that you did and then with thinking about your kids and now all your grandkids too, is there anything that, like one thing that you would want them to know about you and your military service, or your just overall service to the nation?
It was immensely challenging and immensely worthwhile, regardless of all difficulty, pain, and suffering, and the relocations that, in particular, my daughters endured. They're out of that history. There were permanent changes in the American system of developing. Out of my personal history, the items, the short-range attack missile was deployed. It was a major deterrent to the Soviet Union. As they reported in open literature, it was a frightening capability. That was a major contribution to the security of my family and the country and what I believe in. Secondarily, the innovation of the long-term 5, 10, 15-year forecasts of technology for weapons, foreign weapon systems, by using all available information, not just the expensive stuff in space or whatever. Use it all, integrate it, calibrate it, compare it. That has become a mandatory part of the modern intelligence community activities, which I cannot describe because even on the web, the methods and sources are controlled. I will not describe those.
Right.
And thirdly, or last in any case, the threat assessment report process, which became legally required under congressional Secretary of Defense procedures for weapon system acquisition, became a permanent part of the national security system. And that was a tribute to the Joint Service Agency. Men and women met together, trusted each other. The information we put on paper was at the secret level, but it was all calibrated against other information to make sure that it was as accurate as humanly possible. And we were challenged that we were engaged in smoke and mirrors. And our answer, which I had the privilege of offering to folks from downtown, we will wait. We will get our grades later.
Sure.
And largely it happened as described.
Well, Hal, you've had a great career, and you've mentioned your family. Maybe why don't you've got two members of your family in the room. I don't know that they got on the camera, but maybe at least introduce them. We've got two dogs here. Have been very quiet, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe a few jingles here and there.
Oh, yes.
They won't
This
make-
is Maria.
Maria, and what was the
Her
other guy's
mother
name?
is Lace.
Lace.
Border Collies.
Yeah.
Little people.
Well, Hal, that pretty much wraps up the interview. I would like to give you, on behalf of the Americans in Wartime Museum and our Oral History Project, maybe just hold that up to the camera real quick. That's, I'm sure you're familiar with that. That's one of our challenge coins. And
Thank you.
Hal, it's been a pleasure for me. Pretty technical stuff. I tried to keep up with you, but I think it was a great interview.
You did great.
And is there anything else you wanted to add, or?
I express my appreciation to you, your organization, the colleagues of the other services I've met at the Military History and others, and they're wonderful people who have put their lives on the line to defend our people, our Constitution, and now it's in the hands of the next generation, and I thank you all.